melt is when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Nova Legends podcast, I have international trade lawyer George Egge, who grew up here in Arlington, went to middle school here before going to California, Haywood, California, becoming a quarterback on the Auburn national championship team of 1957. Mr. Egge became a very prominent lawyer after going to Georgetown Law School. Became a prominent lawyer first for Cleary Gottlieb. And then spent most of his career representing the interests of Spanish businesses, lobbying Washington, often for the olive industry. And he spent a lot of time also raising a lot of kids. Mr. Egge has 11 kids, I believe 11, and they all went to O'Connell High School. Mr. Egge, thanks for joining me. Nice to talk to you.
Nice talking to you.
Yeah. Well, I know you were a military we call them brat. Your dad was in, I believe, the Army, and I think he was stationed in Spain at some point. Do you have any memories of those days in Spain as a kid?
Well, I was in law school when we were in Spain.
Okay.
You know, we lived all around the States. After during the war, we were with my mother's family in New Orleans, and then after the war, we were in Texas for 3 years, and we were up here in Arlington for 3 years, and he was in the Pentagon, and then we were in California 3 years. I went off to college. He then went to Spain, and then I visited him in summer when he was in Spain.
Yeah. Well, so when did you move? When did you move to Arlington, and what neighborhood did you move to?
We came to Arlington in 1940, trying to remember, 1949. We came from Texas up here, and he was working in the Pentagon. We lived over near Westover on 10th Street, 10th and Frederick, and we lived there for 3 years. Went to Swanson Junior High, and went from there, and strangely, I played football there, and then was going to play at W&L, but we got moved to California.
What was Arlington like in those days? Did it feel like a big city? I mean,
no, Arlington. Most of what you saw were the houses that were built in the 20s and 30s, but they barely got off of the main drags. And then right after the war, you had a lot of them. There were just a lot of subdivisions. And, you know, you'd go up to Seven Corners. There was a farm on the way up to Seven Corners. Mm. You had a farm for about the last mile if you went up Wilson Boulevard to Seven Corners. And Seven Corners didn't have anything.
So when you left Arlington, there was probably not much Tyson's. There was no Tyson's Corner. There was
no Tyson's Corner. No Tyson's Corner at all. You were out in the country then.
Yeah, and Falls Church probably felt like a really small town.
Yeah, Falls Church was a small town, but then there was relatively little in the suburbs. Almost all of it had been built, except some stuff on the main highways and just off of them in the 20s and 30s. But besides that, you know, you had Cherrydale existed, and Ballston. I used to play baseball at Ballston, and we played on a field that was where Ballston Heck Company was located, and the Heck Company was located there, and there was a place, you know, where you could ride ponies there.
Yeah. So you know, when you think about Arlington back then, those are the days before integration. Mm-hmm. So Arlington was pretty progressive in that it was one of the first jurisdictions to voluntarily integrate. That was long after those days, though.
Yeah, that was in the 60s, early 60s.
That was in the 60s. But did you know any Black kids in the area?
Yeah.
Did you know kids?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. And had a very good friend from Haiti who and then the boys who lived up in Halls Hill. I used to have to ride my bike through Halls Hill going up to Greenbrier baseball field, which was still the baseball field for Georgetown High School.
Yeah. So you went to Swanson, and I know your son Mike, who's my good friend. Full disclosure, he's gonna want me to ask you about a famous actor, Warren Beatty. So I guess you knew Warren Beatty at
Swanson. Warren was I played football, basketball, and baseball with him. He played all three, and he was my center in football. And when we'd have a variety show or something, he was the MC. He thought he was Milton Berle.
Yeah,
and he was very good.
Yeah. So when you think about Warren Beatty playing center, in the movie Heaven Can Wait, he was quite a good quarterback.
That's right. Hey, well, I told him he was always trying to take my job away from me, but
well, that was back in the day when the linemen weren't that much bigger than the quarterbacks and the running back. Everybody was about the same size.
That was before weightlifting came in.
Yeah.
I mean, you did have bigger, but often the guards weren't much bigger than the backfield guys.
Yeah. So, did you guys ever go to DC? Was that a thing? Did it seem far away? Would you guys go to?
I remember going to see a movie in DC, going up Frederick Street to Washington Boulevard and getting on a bus. And this was a big thing, going all alone. This is probably 7th. In fact, Warren came. We all went together, and we went to see Jim Thorpe, All American, down at the Warner Theater, and that. But that didn't happen very often. I think that's the only trip I can remember going into Washington.
Well, in those post-World War II years, and also during the Korean War years, there was always a threat of nuclear war.
Yep.
And the world could come to an end any moment. The Soviets were pointing missiles at us. Do you remember those days and bombshells?
Yes. In 7th grade, when I was in 7th grade, Arlington didn't finish Stratford Junior High School in time. So they had to stick us all around the county in 7th grades. And they had maybe half a mile from where I live now, they had some temporary army buildings up at Old Dominion and 26th Street. And we'd go up there and we would have a drill. They had a siren that was up there until about 10 years ago. They'd turn the siren on and you'd go into the center hall and you'd get out on your knees and cover your head.
Yeah.
And, it's supposed to be preparing for a nuclear attack.
Yeah. Were the memories of Arlington so positive that you decided that one day you'd have your home there? Because obviously you moved away.
Yeah.
You're not coming back.
Yeah, no, I never thought of it. But when I did come back, the only place I thought of going was Arlington. When I got married, we moved into Buckingham, which had been one of the first of the garden apartment things and facilities in the area.
It's still there too.
It's still there, and actually, one of the reasons why it had been so popular in the war, it was built just before and at the beginning of the war, and they had decoding things there on the other side of Arlington Boulevard. It was everyone would walk to work, or not everyone, but the ones that worked there, and there was a lot of them. And then when we came, it was a very popular place for young people just married to go.
Yeah. Well, so at some point you went to California. You went to Haywood, which is, I believe, in Alameda County, where I used to live in Alameda when my dad was stationed at the Oakland Army Base. So we lived there for a while. Yep. Why did you guys move to Alameda? I mean, to Haywood?
No, my dad from here got assigned to something called Parks Air Force Base, which was in the Korean War, it was the basic training base for the Air Force on the West Coast. And we moved there, and then somehow finagled, I ended up going 10 miles into school in Haywood, which was out of the valley and just over the coastal range, about 10 miles away.
Did you feel like you were a good football player at the time, and that did you have the reputation?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess, because as a sophomore, after the first game, I was a starting quarterback, and I I had played at Swanson, and the 2 years that I was at Swanson, I was a starting quarterback. And the coach at W&L came up to me at a track meet that spring, and he knew me from. They used to have, the county would have a football camp or something or other where it was really an excuse for W&L to practice early. And I remember I went as a junior high school guy and well, didn't do too well. They didn't want us kids there. And so, but anyway, the coach who might have tried to run me off, but 2 years later, after I started 2 years, he came up to me at the track meet, county track meet, the last in May, and comes up with football. He says, "I got a football for you, so we can start practicing for the fall." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, Coach, I won't be here." I was going to California and went to California.
Did you remember that coach's name, the football coach?
Coach Batson, Batson.
Okay, great.
He was a short guy.
Yeah, it was so good. So what are your first memories of going to California? Did it seem much different to you than Arlington?
Oh yeah, a lot different. California in the 50s, they make movies about that.
Yeah, American Graffiti.
But I remember going, then we could get our driver's license when we were 15 years old. And just before we left, I got my driver's license. And my dad went ahead in the car we'd just bought, and I took the old car and followed him, with the family divided up between us. And I got 2 tickets on the trip within the first month after I graduated from junior high. And I didn't get in trouble for any of them because I was following him, and he's speeding, I was speeding, and we both got tickets.
Yeah. So you were happy in California. You enjoyed going to high school?
Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. It was a lot of fun. I just got back from California. I just had a grandson graduate across the bay from Hayward. I guess it wasn't even 10 miles away, and I sat there. As I sat there in the graduation, I said, "Gee whiz, just think, this same week in 1955, which was 45 and 23, 68 years ago, I was graduating over at Hayward across the bay."
Yeah. Well, today we think of California as a very liberal place. And, Mike and I argue politics. I'm the big liberal. He's the conservative. What was the feel of California back in the early 50s? Did it feel liberal or?
Well, kids didn't pay much attention to politics. All they cared about were hot rods and reuse, and they'd go around with the hood off the car and with an engine you could eat dinner off of, and have drag races. And I remember once outside of a drive-in movie, a boy who went to school with my sister at another high school he came up and he says, "Rum, rum," on his engine. He says, "You want a drag?" He said, "Oh, I guess so." And so we dragged with him, and all of a sudden it went clunk, 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 and clunk, 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 clunk. And oh my gosh, something happened. So we stopped. And he had shifted into second or something, and he dropped his transmission. He said, "Gee, I think I dropped my transmission." And sure enough, he had.
Did it ever remind you of much later, the movie American Graffiti came out, and
that I was just thinking about American Graffiti. American Graffiti was very accurate.
Yeah,
they were dealing with a town in the valley, but this was in the valley before the San Joaquin Valley, and it was pretty accurate. You'd have guys out with their hot rods and all of that. It was fairly accurate.
Yeah, and it became Happy Days, or one of the most successful shows in history. What about football? Who was your high school football coach, and what did you learn from him? And tell us about your high school football career.
Well, my high school football coach was first year was a guy named John Feckety, who had been All-American tackle at University of California, and then our coach came over the last 2 years, a fellow named John Feckerty. And we did well. We didn't, one of the bigger leagues in Northern California was the Alameda County Athletic League. And the ACAL, we came in second, I guess, my last year, and we were around the middle of the pack the other years. We play against Alameda and all except the ones that were at Oakland. We played Richmond, Alameda, El Cerrito, San Lorenzo. And at any rate, we then finished the last year. I made all ACAL and then got to play in the East Bay, West Bay All-Star game that they had in August. And no, all went well.
Yeah. Well, how did you end up going to Auburn?
That was easy. Actually, I was locked in. My father went to Auburn and played with the coach at Auburn, and he sent back the clippings and all of that, and they were kind enough to offer a scholarship. And so I went back. And did real well my freshman year. And right after that, one of my roommates beat me out, and I ended up graduating in 3 years. But I had a great record at Auburn. We won the national championship, and I threw one pass for one completion, for one touchdown, and a total of 2 yards. Strangely enough, they have those things online.
Was that quarterback? Was that Nix? Was that the quarterback? That
Lloyd Nix. Yeah, Lloyd is still a good friend, and he's a dentist in
Decatur.
Decatur, Alabama.
Yeah. Well, tell us about your coach. His name is Ralph Jordan.
Yeah.
He was wounded at D-Day.
Yeah.
He was actually a basketball coach at Auburn before he ever became a head football coach.
Yeah, he had been basketball before he became football, and he came back after the war, and he was at the University of Georgia, and then he came from Georgia to Auburn in very poor times. They almost had to buy the uniforms for him. And he did very well beginning in the early 50s. And he had a very good record. And then he continued the record. They named the stadium after him. He was, we won the national championship and then won the SEC various times. And he was coach of the year for the country. A very fine man, and he continued to coach until 75, I guess. And when I first came, when I was just out of law school, I remember they had some alumni meeting, and he was seeing him again up here. He was a very fine gentleman.
What was his style, and what did you learn from him? I mean, coaches have such a big effect on us. The way we lead, the way we try to inspire. So what did he teach you?
He was just a very steady man. He was not, he could call on people, but usually his assistant coaches did that. He was just a very fine gentleman, and recognized as such. And when he left, they named the stadium, or put his name on the stadium along with someone else.
Mr. Egge, did Coach Jordan ever talk about D-Day and getting wounded on the beach?
Never talked about it. And but he had been wounded at D-Day. My father had known that. They'd seen each other just before he went over.
Yeah,
my dad then went to Pacific, went to New Guinea.
Yeah,
Okinawa. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Egge, that was a very turbulent time. It would get worse in terms of turbulence in the 60s, but like if you watch the movie Mississippi Burning, that was like 62, 63, right. The old Miss team. Right. But there were no black players in the SEC at the time, and there wouldn't be for another 10 years or so.
No, not until the 70s, I think.
Yeah.
In California, I know we have a picture of the All-Star game, and I ended up playing defense in the All-Star game, and they have a picture of a defensive team, and it's me and three black players in the background, in the backfield.
So you played against black players in high school.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. But
Sure.
in college, did you feel, I mean, as a white student, it might not be that apparent to you, but did you feel the racial tension of Alabama at those days?
I can't say as I did. I'd had ties going back to the at Randolph Field in Texas in the late 40s. The guy who taught me how to box, a fellow named A.J. McCoy. I used to then, in turn, he taught me how to box, and I then would work in his corner when he'd go around for his matches, and the same thing. The military had desegregated in 1947, and the same sort of thing, I guess, at Parks. Trying to remember James Boyce. I worked at a driving range, and he used to come over there and we'd hit golf balls and go to movies together.
Yeah. So I guess, when you're in a southern town, that's just the way things work. Well, you graduate from Auburn. You have that great season where you guys go undefeated and finish number one in the country. Right. And I believe you started 4 games at
no, I started. I played in 1 game.
Oh,
my roommate Lloyd had taken over.
Okay. Well, I was trying to.
But I'd beaten him out freshman year.
Okay. Anyway. I was trying to inflate your resume there, Mr. Egge. So how did you end up in Spain again? I think you mentioned it briefly.
Well,
but I guess
when I got out, I came up. When I graduated from Auburn, I worked on oil rigs out in this part of the summer. And then, meanwhile, my dad had been transferred to Spain, where he was in charge of building the joint bases there. And I went, and we lived in town because he worked in the air ministry. We didn't live out of the base. In the first year, I met this young little girl, 6 or 7 years old. And I found out she had a sister. Well, I never met the sister, but the next year I went to visit and I met the sister. I thought it might be a summer romance, but we began writing, and we wrote with too much frequency, maybe. But anyway, I went back and asked for her hand in marriage, and they said, what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm finishing law school. They said, oh, well, come back when you finish. And so I came back and got a job in Washington. I took the Federal Service entrance exam, and I got a job as an international economist in the management intern program at Commerce. And so then I wrote for her hand, and they, since I had a job, they had trouble saying no. I mean, we got along very well. It wasn't anything against me. Yes, they wanted to be sure that I could take care of their daughter. So anyway, we got married in December, and that was it. And then 13 months later, we had our first child, and then a few more after that.
Yeah, just a few. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you did choose correctly, and as did she. Mr. Egge, what was law school like in those days?
Oh, law school was mainly Socratic method. They'd get up and ask you questions, and professors usually put on a pretty good show. They'd ask questions, they'd joke with your answers and what have you. I remember once there was at Georgetown, there was a Professor Snee, and he gets up and he starts questioning this guy, really hitting him on the cases and what the case was about, and what did it mean, and what have you. And he asked him a question. The guy couldn't come up with an answer, and he taps on the podium, and then he says, "Gentlemen," and the fellow's name was Burns, and he says, "I guess we will have, will as we wait here, we will have to fiddle while Burns roams. But no, it was I don't know whether it's still that way or not. I've never looked back.
And I assume it was all men. Was Georgetown all men then?
We didn't have a lot of ladies, but I can remember 3 or 4 in the class.
Oh, okay. Right.
Almost, yeah, somewhere between 2 and 4.
Yeah. So when you're in law school in those days, is there an expectation that you're going to make a lot of money when you get out of law school, or was it different then? Was being a lawyer not such a high paid?
I think it's probably high paid, but it's funny, that you were too busy going to law school. Yeah. And I don't think you, I can't remember thinking a heck of a lot about money. You'd assume that you made a good salary, but I never recall looking and finding out how much you made as a lawyer.
Exactly. Well, I don't think many people would do it today if you didn't make a lot of money doing it, because it's a tough gig.
Oh yeah, it can be a tough gig, but I don't know. But if you like what you're doing, you don't work.
Yeah, and if you're good at it, like you and Mike are, it makes that much more fun. So you ended up at Cleary Gottlieb, a firm where Mike also worked. How did you get there, and what was Cleary Gottlieb like in the 1960s?
Well, it was interesting. First of all, Cleary had broken off from another firm in 1947 in New York, and then they set up in Washington with George Ball, who was later Assistant Secretary, Undersecretary of State.
Yeah.
But at any rate, all I did was wherever they had someone interviewing, I'd go interview. And a friend of mine had gone to UVA and interviewed at Cleary there, and came and told me about it. Well, I was working as an international economist on the Chile-Peru desk and at the Department of Commerce. And he told me about it. It sounded like they had some involvement in the Pan Am antitrust case with regard to Eastern Latin America. And at any rate, he asked me, he told me about it, and he said, well, I have the number of a guy. And so, all right, not Memorial Day, Armistice Day in November, I had already interviewed with a few firms that fortunately I was on law review and didn't have trouble getting interviews. But anyway, I called this number for Cleary and get him here. And the guy must not have had much to do. He said, what do you, and how are your grades and what have you? And, in the law review, and what do you do? And I told him, and it tied in. And it also happened that I'd written a law school, a law review note on community antenna television. And they had a big community antenna television case. And he says, well, when could you come in? And I said, well, today's a holiday. I can come in right now. He says, good, come on in. And I came on in, and they gave me, and when, after whatever procedure they went through, a week or 10 days later, they made me a job offer, and I took it. And strangely enough, I never did a lick of work on the Pan Am case that we handled in the Supreme Court, nor the community antenna television, the prior thing for cable, when they sent the signals out rather than the way we get it now. But anyway, and then I was there and I worked on the electrical industry antitrust cases. There were 1,800 cases all around the country. We only had these and we tried a case before Judge Sirica. And we had a great claim. These guys had been fixing prices like crazy. But we had a great claim to fame. And that was that the damages that were found in our case were the smallest in terms of as a percent of sales of anywhere in the country. But that was And they were all, probably only about 7 or 8 tried, and then they settled them all because of the results in the game.
Did you enjoy that kind of work, the antitrust work? Because
I did that, and then, and as that petered out, I began doing what I ultimately spent most of my time on, which was international international trade work. And there, they had something, we worked to save for the chemical industry something called American Selling Price Valuation, something that helped raise the duty by valuing it at the U.S. price rather than the foreign price. And, and did that and other things. And eventually the Spanish olive industry came to me after about 7 years, and I started representing them on legislative matters against legislation trying to raise the duties on their olives. And that was it. And then I ultimately left Cleary because their shoe industry came to me, and they had a big attempt to put on countervailing, what they call countervailing duties or anti-dumping duties. And they offered me the job, and it would have been Cleary, but one of the named partners had a conflict of interest, or at least thought he did. He represented an association that made vinyl or something used in making some shoes, and felt that it was one. And I said, well, if we can work it out, fine. And then called me in and said, look, you're up for partner. You're going to be partner in January. And this was October. I said, if I can't bring clients with me, and so I went ahead and I said, if you can work out the conflict, fine. But anyway, I started a great adventure, namely practicing on my own. Initially, I worked with another fellow from Cleary, but then we basically had separate practices.
Were you making good money at Cleary? I'm sure you thought you were.
Oh, at Cleary, sure, but the money that you made back then wasn't anything like now. But of course, there's inflation. We made, when you look at it, I don't think we made significantly less. It was less in absolute terms, and probably pretty much the same in terms of after adjustment for inflation.
Yeah.
But
so when you're going to start your own firm, you'd never really been in business before.
Nope.
Was it kind of intimidating? When you're a good lawyer, you go to work, they give you work to do, you do try to bring in clients, but a lawyer's task is pretty discreet. You know what you're going to do, but all of a sudden you have to run a business, and you're raising a family. Did it seem like a very complicated task to open up a firm on your own?
Yeah, it was pretty well, it wasn't complicated. You were so busy doing what you were doing that the rest just basically came along. Compared with what you were doing and the effort that you were putting into that, the other came. Obviously, you tried to make money, and I was established. I set it where I'd make it as much as I was making, or more than I was making. But I didn't have any idea what a partner in law firm made. I just know that I made it. And clearly, we made as associates. We made we made good money. We talked with other associates and knew what they were getting elsewhere. And we were doing very well.
Did you miss having colleagues at when you practiced by yourself?
Well, I actually, the first 8 years I did. I was with 2 other colleagues from Cleary who later left, and we did, or one had left before and one just after, and we had it, but we were partners in name only, and just contributing to joint expenses, and that was it. And then after that, we ended up, the lease ended, and so we went our separate ways. And And then it was all alone. But by that time, I had their steel industry, their zinc industry. I had a good client base, and I just never had something teaching you the ins and outs of the finance firm. And you were busy. So long as you kept busy, you were making money. And
Did you have an associate that would work for you to help you out?
I had 2 or 3 people who came in, but no, as an employee, no, I did not have an associate. I had some law journal guys or some people who were between that I often brought in for individual projects. But no, I did it all myself.
Were you passionate about international trade? Were you ideological at all, or is just
No, I wasn't particularly ideological. I had represented what we consider at Cleary. I'd represented some that were protectionist industry. I had represented the Australian sugar industry at Cleary, and what we were after. What we were after in saving American selling price valuation for the chemical industry. I remember a lady who used to be on, her husband is general counsel at the trade representative's office, and she was on whatever that station is over at American University, a gal named Diane Ream. And then when we were at a thing that the Common Market was getting in, who we represented the Common Market office in Washington. We were at a Christmas party, and she heard that we were representing the chemical industry on American selling price valuation. It's almost like like we were dealing with the devil himself. No, but I think when you handle it professionally, it's not something you get particularly, that you're doing it from a passionate point of view, pro free trade, protectionism. You just deal with the facts and work from there.
And you kept up with the politics of international trade through the years, through the Trump years of protectionism, through like the Reagan years where it was more laissez-faire. Have you kept up with the politics of trade through the years?
I follow it, follow it in paper and what have you. But when you're dealing with it, from a legal point of view, you're dealing with the law and how the law applies and doesn't. Obviously, you try to get hold of any wind that will help you, or be prepared to answer a wind the other way. But no, I can't say it's that really changed things much.
Well, what do you think about Mike's practice of law? Mike did a lot of firm management stuff, which you had to do being a solo practitioner. Do you think that the practice of law was more enjoyable during your day, or when you look at when Mike goes through? I know you guys are close. Do you like the way practice of law is today?
Oh yeah, I have no problem, and certainly he's had a very enjoyable practice. And in the last 20 years, at the beginning, it wasn't as easy. I'm not as easy. He's made his way, and now he does. He does very well. He gets very interesting work, and that's what you often is more important to you. If it's interesting and you're enjoying what you're doing, as they say, you never work a day in your life. Well, if you're enjoying what you're doing, and sometimes that, that can, it doesn't necessarily represent your view on any particular thing, whether it be in the case of foreign trade, protectionist, or free trade, or what have you. You're just dealing with a fact situation and how the law applies to it, or what you need in order to loosen it up so your client can do what they want to do.
Was it difficult to retire?
I just kind of phased out. I guess after about 30 years, almost 40 years, I moved back. I moved my office up to my attic because I never had clients in town anyway at that stage, and I kept an office downtown. With one of those organizations that you have an office when you want it, and it basically I basically just phased it out. It worked out well. I didn't. Some of the clients have been clients 20 and 30 years. The olive industry and the steel industry, those were clients of 20, 25-year clients. But it all came together very well at about that time. Most of the problems were beginning to go away. In other words, the time that I had been needed, well, it ended up being over 20, 30 years, but it basically phased out. And it went well. I had many of them come back afterwards when they had a problem, and I go ahead and do it for them. But I never said, "Hey, I'm retiring," and phased out. It just gradually happened.
Sounds like it was a job well done. So, well, let's talk about your family. You and Carmen, Miss Egge, have raised a wonderful family. Unbelievable amount of beautiful grandkids. I took one of your grandkids and you to a game one time, and you've got grandkids everywhere. When you think about raising 11 kids, did you start out to have a family that big? And I mean, it would seem to be very intimidating.
I don't think we started out to have a family that big. I came from a family of 6. She came from a family of 5. So there were the two of us. Why not 11? No, we didn't. They just kept coming, and we ended up. I remember that after about 9, we said, "Wait a second, we better start spreading it out here a little bit." They had 9 kids and an average of. I guess there were an average of 20 months between them. And so we checked, and then we let 40 months pass. And he sends us 2. Who says the Lord doesn't have a sense of humor?
That's right.
And fortunately, after that, didn't send us any more. So
that was Peter and Paul, the last 2.
Yeah, Peter and Paul, the last 2.
Yeah.
And no, but they were the ones that was 40 months, and still it ended up being 20 because there was 2 of them.
Do you think it'd be harder to raise 11 kids today than it was when you did it, assuming that you had the same success?
No, not really. I mean, the real thing, I guess the big thing is working with your kids and seeking to teach them certain things and do what's right and go from there. And we've been very lucky. Knock on wood, we haven't had a black sheep yet, but never know what can happen. But no, we've been very fortunate.
Yeah.
And and we have, I guess, that we have in the kids. I think one of the families has 2, another one has 8, and the rest are all in between. Gives us a total of 38, though.
Yeah, that's probably almost some kind of record, and I think they're going to keep coming.
Well, no, frankly, I think we're about done. At least judging from the ages of the mothers in the family.
Oh, okay.
I think our youngest is close to 40, if not 40.
How many great-grandchildren do you have?
Just one.
Just one? Oh, wow.
Just one. Wait till those factories wait till the 38 get going.
Exactly.
I don't think we'll live to see that, but.
Well, you're one of the most experienced fathers in the country. Do you ever counsel your kids on how to be a dad?
No, I think that if they, whatever they get, we learn from our parents. What we learned is we learned what worked with us and what didn't work. We learned, and that in some way is what to do and what not to do. And I think our kids, it's probably the same way. There are some things that we may not have done, or they think it wouldn't be too good and they don't do it. And hopefully that keeps making it better, you know?
Yeah. Do you think do you think it's scary? As a father today, I think it's the world has a sharper edge to it today. I think with the guns and just the violence, I worry about kids. Are those things that you worry about? Have things changed to you, or do you feel like it's always been this way?
There's always something new happening. And some of those things that were new before aren't so new anymore. And it's gotten used to it. But at the time, it was pretty wild. I mean, think about the president of the United States being shot in Dallas, Texas. I mean, you can't get much rougher than that.
Yeah.
And sure, we've had more and more gun crimes and what have you. But I imagine there have been new problems all the way, and now we're having to face artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Since we haven't been able to do enough with regular intelligence, now we're having to face whatever artificial intelligence brings us. And there's always going to be something to worry about and something to deal with. But all you do is cope with it and do what you can do.
And you got to keep, even if the world seems harsh, you got to keep bringing kids into the world.
I wouldn't avoid bringing them in. No, I didn't avoid bringing them in. And we had some pretty bad stuff happening,
Yeah.
But it depends upon how you're going to see it. There are good things that happen too. And so far, I don't see it getting more and more negative than getting better and better in some aspects. So you have both, and you just have to live with it.
Well, Mr. Egge, as I look through my backyard, you're about maybe 500 yards from me right now.
Oh, is that right?
Oh yeah, I live right there on Ditmar. Did you
on Ditmar?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right there, not too far from where Mike is, and also close to his old home. Right. Did you ever think about the big Egge home, selling a home and moving somewhere warm or somewhere in the country, or do you like it here at Arlington?
Oh, I like it here. I think we're set here, and we have the majority of our kids are in the area, and we're very happy. I think we're liable to go out feet first.
Yeah. Well, last question, Mr. Egge. This has been a joy talking to you. Do you still keep up with football? Are you still a big fan of the game?
Oh yeah, sure, big fan of the game. I was went to the Redskins until about 10 or 15 years ago, till they moved to Maryland. I went the first 2 or 3 years and then gave up on it, but still follow it and follow most sports. Watch the sports on the weekend.
And do you keep up with your grandkids' sports?
Oh yeah. Strangely enough, Michael was football, Willie was football, John was football, had, good crop of quarterbacks actually. And then all of a sudden, grandkids, one of my son-in-laws is a water polo player. And now I've got lots of water polo players.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
this has been great. I'm so glad we finally got a chance to do this. Hopefully we can get together and have catch another game, or I'm going to Mike's house tomorrow. Maybe I'll.
Wonderful. We'll see you there. Yeah, we're going to be there.
It looks like we might be inside tomorrow.
Hope not, but I think you may be right.
Yeah, but we can celebrate Olivia inside or outside. So
it doesn't matter. Is it tomorrow or Sunday?
Is it? You know what? I should. I think you're right. I think it's Sunday.
Okay.
I think it's Sunday.
Can't be worried because something goes.
Yeah. Mike's gonna blame me for getting you the wrong time.
Not there.
Yeah. But anyway, Mr. Egge, this has been a joy, and I look forward to seeing you this weekend.
Very good. Take care.
Thanks again, Mr. Egge.